$800 for a dealer tow package for my Grand Highlander. That's how much they wanted, and I'm just not going to pay that. That's combined more than I've spent on all the hitches on cars I've had in the past. So it's, to me, a crazy, ridiculous price. So I'm going to compare that to an aftermarket tow package. And I have three options here with different price points as well as time commitments. So let's start with the dealer tow package. Basically, it's no hacks, which is great, but it's $800. It's integrated within the bumper versus below the bumper. All the aftermarket packages are below the bumper, and I don't see a real advantage or disadvantage other than aesthetics. The time required I have is about an hour. You have to make a call, go to the appointment. That could easily balloon depending on the dealership and their amount of service. But reasonable is about an hour. You will be able to tow with this package, of course, and there's no DIY hacks like bumper or panel removals. There's no additional DIY required or parts or tools. And if there's a rear foot sensor, they'll take care of that. They'll basically move it to the side. So let's compare that to some aftermarket options. You can install just the hitch for about $214. It's been trending higher lately, but certainly under $250. And it is below the bumper. Requires about an hour. It's very easy. Basically, you're installing 4 bolts, raising up the hitch, installing the 4 bolts, and using a torque wrench to the required torque, and you're ready to go. So no other hacks required. If you want to go install the Grand Highlander converter box and harness, that's going to require more effort. And the cost is a bit higher too. And I have this in green because it's probably the most likely or the one that I would recommend, because it still requires some effort. It allows you to tow. It's the cheapest one that you can tow with. It's below the bumper. Time required, I have about 3 hours, which includes ordering parts, and then you have to deal with a panel removal and also working around this lower bumper area because there's very, very little room. However, you can tow with it. It does require DIY and sort of a hack, and there's no additional parts or tools required. And the rear foot sensor I did not evaluate. Mine did not come with that option. And finally, a hacked 2008-2019 Highlander converter box. And why you'd want to do that is because you can buy that converter box much cheaper. So the total price for my build was about $240. It's below the bumper. Now, your time required does go up substantially because it's more difficult. There's more parts to order with different vendors. There's 2 hacks, and also then you have the panel removal, which you still have with without the hack. You can tow with it, and it does require DIY. And I do have no additional parts and tools, and unfortunately that's not the case. You do have additional parts and tools. So let me go through the disclaimer on this one. Basically, the information and the video is intended for educational purposes, and any work related to the topics in this video should be performed by a licensed technician or apprentices under supervision of licensed technicians. Prop LLC is not responsible for any possible damages or injuries caused by the misuse of any information provided. Also, removing the hacks required basically is removing a brake wire from a 10-pin connector, which is really easy, and then swapping a 4-pin connector. But that requires purchasing a new connector, and you need a crimping tool. So with that, I'm going to move on to installing the hitch, installing the Highlander converter box, and then following it up with a hack, which is going to require a lot more information and more details. All right, so I'm super excited. Today I'm going to install a hitch, which is mostly for my bike rack, but also for a trailer, which is going to be a bit more work. But for my bike rack, this is going to be great. I got this from Napa. They had one of the best prices. It's a Kurt manufacturing. And I'll go over later a couple things with Napa. They do have a price guarantee, which I'll see. I'll already have an opportunity to take advantage of that. And we'll see, though, up to a year. It does have a few spots that I'm just going to take some spray paint, cover over. A little bare metal showing, very minimal, but I'm just going to do it as a precaution. It's pretty simple. There's only 4 bolts that you need to put on. So going under the car, they're located on either side of the exhaust. You'll see that there are 2 covers, bolt covers. One was here, and another one, if I can get a clear shot, is over here. This is what was on it before, this little cover, and you can use a flathead screwdriver to pop those off. So I popped those off on both sides. So next, it's a matter of raising the hitch up, just putting the 4 bolts in, 2 on this side, 2 on the other side, and using my torque wrench to lock it down to, I think it said 86 foot-pounds. So all in all, this should be a fast and easy install. And here are the instructions. You can see 4 bolts, 1, 2, 3, 4, very simple. The instructions, just very simple, straightforward. These are the little pieces that I popped out. They popped out very easy. Okay, so I had my wife help lift this into place. There's no instructions on how to lift it into place other than you want to tilt it forward to put this in first and then rotate up. I can get the screw in the back in and then put the front one in, go to the other side, and then work on bolting those down. And these have a conical washer with notches, and that will go against the surface to help lock it down and keep it in place. So that'll go on up this way and then the bolt up through it. 2 on this side and then 2 on the other side. So now I will just use my torque wrench to 86 foot-pounds and call it a day. So installing the converter box, which converts the turn signal and brake signal into a signal that the trailer can use, you basically need to pull off the cup holder on the driver's side rear of the car. And it's simply lifting it up, moving it out. It's not easy. Just kind of jerk it around and it pops off. Then there's the connector that's inside here. And that will plug in to my trailer converter box / harness. All right, next I'm going to connect the ground. And this is basically going to fit in this hole. I'll have to bend this up to get it to fit correctly. And this is a number 10 millimeter. It's a long screw for this attachment. I'm not sure why it's so long. Coming out very easy. Now I'm going to take something and stuff it down here because I know what's going to happen. I'll fish this bolt out and it'll go flying down. I'll have to fish it out. Okay, so I have the terminal bent at a 90-degree angle. And I'm going to go ahead and screw it back in. The kit came with a soft, double sticky pad. So I just put it down and keep that still from bouncing around. Got my ground here. So now I'm ready to close this up. Just fit this over. And push it down. And done with that. So the next step is to remove from the connector in the rear of the car. This is a 10-942 connector, and it's 4 pins, and male connector, but it seems to have female pins. You have to remove this cap. It's basically the male version of the connector with these rubber inserts for waterproof. Normally you'd have pins, and these are just regular inserts without holes to run wires. It's connected together up here on the female connector. You basically press this down to remove it. However, I tried to do this without from the bottom coming up from below, and it was horrible. It was stuck on, and it did not come off easy, not as easy as it shows in some of the videos. So I ended up taking off this lower portion of the rear bumper, and there's a video that I put in the description. Basically, there's tabs, little connector tabs that you lift up and you can pull out. You have to kind of wrangle it out to get it to come free. There's also, before that, there's these clips, but again, there's a better video on that in the description. Then you have much easier access to that connector in the back. And I'll need two hands to get this to plug in. So I won't be able to show that, but basically I'm just going to plug it in. In summary, you'll need to remove the cup holder in the rear driver's side of the car. You'll install the 10-pin connector. You'll install the ground with a 10mm socket. Then you'll come around to the back of the car, and underneath on the rear bumper, you'll need to install the trailer harness connector. And it's helpful to remove this panel. And then what I ended up doing was stuffing my trailer. What I ended up doing was stuffing my trailer wire in this cavity in the hitch. There is a little bracket I bought that I could install. I just do not use a trailer enough at this point to do that, but it is an option. Next, let's take a look at the cheapest option. This is using a couple hacks with a 2008 to 2019 Highlander converter box and harness. And this option requires some technical abilities and knowledge with electronics. I do not recommend this. I have a disclaimer down here if you are not familiar with working with electronics. The first part, however, of the hack is fairly easy. It's removing a brake wire from a 10-pin connector. It's the second one, where the harness connector does not match the Grand Highlander connector in the back of the rear bumper here. And so what's needed is to purchase a new connector and swap out the Highlander with the Grand Highlander. And that requires stripping and crimping, a crimping tool to crimp on the new pins. And then you insert it into the connector. And the biggest issue is you could get wires mixed up. So let me jump into the wiring diagram next. All right, so this is a table showing all the details of the pinouts from the 10-pin connector, which is in the side rear armrest, and it's looking at the connector. And this is the driver's side rear bumper trailer connector. So you connect the trailer harness to this connector, and it is also looking at this connector. So let's start with this female Grand Highlander connector. Looking at the front of the connector, I list the pins and also the path. Now, I obtained this information just using a multimeter and testing with the vehicle. And the way it works is you have signals from the car and a power line. Number 8's power, the rest are the signals like the taillights, the brakes, and so on. Those go into the converter box, and the converter box does what it does and converts everything into the trailer signals. And those are output to these pins 1, 2, 5, and 6, and those get routed to the rear of the car to this connector. And this is where you plug in the harness which is over here. Now, the only difference is that this is, if you're using the Highlander converter box, this is a Highlander connector, and this is a Grand Highlander connector. So you need to cut this one off and then purchase a separate one to crimp, strip the wires, crimp, and plug into this connector, and then you can use it to plug into the Grand Highlander connector. But let's go back to this 10-pin connector. Here, I wrote down the path, the description, the car wire color, and then the converter box wire color. So for 1 and 2, it's the trailer converter output, it's the taillights, the left signal and brake. 3 and 4 are the car converter input, which are the headlights, left signal and brake. Then we have the trailer ground for 5, and for 6 is the right signal and brake. 7 has no connection or no pin. 8 is power, 12 volts from the car. 9 is the brake only from the car. This is the rear upper brake in the back. And then finally 10 is the right signal and brake. And these are the wire colors. And I did highlight the 4 colors that get routed back to the connector in the rear of the bumper. So they are a direct 1-to-1. So you can see left signal and brake is black, left signal and brake up here black. I also included the converter wire color just for a reference. And one thing you'll notice, I have the red as crossed out. If you're using the Highlander converter box on the Grand Highlander, and I think this is because on the Highlander, and this would be 2008 to 2019, there's just a left signal and a right signal, not a brake. I'm sorry, let me move down to the car. And so when you're running a right signal and brake into the converter box along with a brake only, it gets confused or messed up. So if you simply remove the brake only, you're basically already sending the right signal and brake to the connector, and then the output becomes right signal and brake, and it works fine. So that's the easy hack, is removing this red wire. Then the next one gets more complicated, because in order to use the trailer harness from the Highlander kit, you need to cut off this connector, and you need to strip wires and crimp them using this newer connector, this 10942, and using the correct pinouts. So you have to make sure you're plugging it in correctly. You're not swapping wires and doing that sort of thing. Otherwise, that can cause problems. All right, so let's move on. I'll give you some examples, show you a direct sample of what I did. Okay, for the Grand Highlander, there is a trailer harness for $80, and then the one next to it, which is for a Highlander 2008 to 2019 for about $32. They're exactly the same. The only difference is the connector, and the connector is not a $40 connector, or $50 rather. So what is needed? Okay, so I found one for $20. That is, the biggest key is the main connector. And on the one side you have the signal lights, which are the yellow and green coming from the car. It looks like there's a ground. There's also this brown wire as a power, and it is powered. So you need to make sure that it's a powered unit. And because there's a fuse, inline fuse on the power side. And then the red is a brake signal. And because the yellow and green are actually turn and brake, and then the red is also a brake signal, you're feeding sort of two brake signals into the box, and it confuses it and causes it to not work. So all that's needed is to remove this pin for the brake line. And the way to do that is, you'll see on this connector, there's two little tabs. You can pop those open and remove the brake signal, and then it works as it should. Now, the next issue with this kit is that the connector that goes to the rear of the car is not compatible. This is compatible with the 2008 to 2019 Highlander, but not the Grand Highlander. So what is needed is to swap it out with this style of connector. And I bought this one separately, and I'll include the link and the cost in the instructions. It was close to $4, not $50, as the Highlander on Amazon is selling for. So kind of a scam to me. But what this will require, you could tap in directly to the wires underneath the car, but there is really very little room to work. I think it's possible, but I figured for $4, I'll get this connector, and then I have a crimping tool to basically swap this connector with the one that fits on the Grand Highlander. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to start next with opening up this connector and removing the brake pin. Then I'll go into modifying this cable for adding the new connector that's compatible. Okay, all you have to do to remove that brake pin, which is this one, is lift this up. That's all. Very simple, very easy. Press this back down. And then I will you can cut this off. You could put electric tape around it. Various different ways to just keep this from touching up against anything. Shrink wrap. Any number of ways will work. And we'll go try it out. Okay, so that worked. Here I have I disconnected brake line with red electrical tape covering it to prevent it from shorting. The kit came with a soft double sticky pad, so I just put it down and keep that still from bouncing around. Got my ground here, so now I'm ready to close this up. Just fit this over and push it down. And done. So I'm not sure what happened with my recording of the cable, cutting the old connector off and then stripping and crimping the new connector. However, you can follow my pinout, and there are numerous YouTube videos on using on crimping what's called like a weather pack connector assembly. I'll run through this one real quick.
For 14 to 16 gauge,
tells you
this number 4
setting up
to crimp
the right
terminal,
crimper.
and then we'll go to number 5. Let's take a closer look at the crimpers.
I'm going to jump ahead, stripping,
crimp.
showing how they strip the
wire.
wire.
So that one's going to have to be trimmed down. Things sticking out there.
One that's unique.
Tabs sticking out. Took the crimpers right up to the edge of those tabs.
Crimping the first part.
Or conversely, you can play back around and get the seal.
And then that
5.
second part, this is the sealed connector part. So you include that in the crimp.
Look. That's one completed terminal. Now for this application, red wire is going to go into alpha. You just, again, male terminal.
Of course, this is only
connector.
a
Just insert it.
two-pin connector. The one
there we go.
we're using is 4,
male
but
terminal,
it snaps in just the same.
Female connector.
Okay.
Wait for the click.
I'll just stop there. And that concludes using an aftermarket tow package with 3 choices for your Grand Highlander. There's the no trailer converter box or harness, the cheapest and the easiest, which is great if you don't need to tow a trailer and you're just using your hitch for utility purposes. The one I'd recommend if you're going to tow is buying a Grand Highlander hitch and converter box. It's a little more expensive, but it's the easiest. It only requires hooking up the rear connector is the most difficult part. You could remove the bumper. That's going to be a lot of work, or additional work, I should say. Or you can remove a back panel to get better access. It's still tight, but doable. Or if you're really trying to go low cost, you can spend a couple, maybe 3 extra hours or so and hacking a 2008, 2019 Highlander converter box. And again, my disclaimer, I would not recommend that unless you know your way around electronics. Well, hope this helps, and hope this is great information so you can make some good choices.